I heard it through the thin wall just after midnight, the kind of crying that isn't loud, only tired. It didn't come in waves, it just lingered, like someone had finally run out of strength to hold themselves together. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. Apartment walls carry all kinds of sounds. Laughter, arguments, televisions left on too late. You learn to live with other people's lives leaking into yours. But this was different. This was raw. Unfiltered. It settled into the room and refused to leave. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks that spidered across the paint. Every few seconds the crying would hitch, like she was trying to stop and couldn't. I wondered how long it had been going on before I noticed. Minutes. Hours. The clock on my phone glowed 12:47 a.m. I set it face down, but the sound pressed on my ears anyway. I tried turning on the fan. Then the TV. Nothing drowned it out. We'd been neighbors for almost a year. I knew her only in fragments, the way she always carried her keys clenched between her fingers, the tired smile she gave when our paths crossed in the hallway, the faint smell of detergent that followed her when the elevator doors closed. I didn't even know her name. That made the sound feel stranger, more intimate. Like I was overhearing a confession never meant for me. I sat up, heart beating faster for no logical reason. What if something was seriously wrong? What if she needed help and no one came because everyone decided it wasn't their problem? Then the other thoughts followed quickly, sharper and more self-protective. What if I made things awkward? What if she didn't want anyone to know? What if I knocked and she looked at me like I'd crossed a line? The crying broke again, thinner this time, and that decided it. I pulled on a hoodie, slipped my feet into shoes without socks, and stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Her door was only 3 steps from mine. I stood there longer than I meant to, my hand hovering inches from the wood, suddenly aware of how loud a knock could sound at this hour. I knocked once. Firm enough to be heard, not enough to sound urgent. The crying stopped instantly. Silence rushed in, heavy and uncomfortable. I almost turned back. Then I heard movement, slow footsteps, a soft sniff. The door opened just enough for me to see one eye, red and glossy. Yes. Her voice cracked on the single word. I'm sorry, I said quickly, already regretting everything. I live next door. I heard you, and I just wanted to make sure you were okay. The door opened wider. She looked worse up close. Her eyes were swollen, lashes clumped together. Her hair was pulled into a loose tie, strands escaping and sticking to her cheeks. She wore an oversized sweater that swallowed her frame. For a moment she just stared at me, as if trying to decide whether I was real. Then she stepped aside. I didn't ask permission. I didn't know what to say. I just followed her in. Her apartment was dim, lit only by a lamp in the corner. A mug sat cold on the coffee table, a tea bag string draped over the edge like it had been forgotten halfway through a thought. A blanket lay crumpled on the couch. The place didn't look messy, just abandoned, like someone had stopped caring a few hours earlier. She sat on one end of the couch, pulling the sweater tighter around herself. I took the other end, leaving space between us. The silence returned, thicker than before. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the distant sound of traffic outside, my own breathing. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing tears instead of erasing them. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. I didn't mean to bother anyone. You didn't, I replied. Really? She nodded, though I wasn't sure she believed me. Her gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. I waited, not knowing if I should speak again or let the quiet do its work. My instinct was to fill the space, to say something reassuring or useful. But nothing felt right. So I stayed quiet. After a long moment, she exhaled shakily. It's just been a lot. That was all it took. The words began to spill out, uneven and rushed, like she was afraid they'd disappear if she didn't say them fast enough. She told me about her mother, who had been sick for months and had taken a sudden turn that afternoon. About the hospital call that came while she was at work, the way her hands had started shaking so badly she had to sit down on the floor of the break room. She talked about bills stacked on the counter, about a supervisor who kept hinting that her personal issues were affecting her performance. She laughed once, bitter and hollow, when she admitted she didn't even know how she was supposed to be strong anymore. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Every now and then I nodded or murmured something small so she knew I was still there. Her voice rose and fell, sometimes breaking, sometimes going flat with exhaustion. Tears slid down her cheeks unchecked. She didn't bother wiping them away anymore. I keep telling myself it's temporary, she said. That I just need to get through this part. But every time I think it's the worst day, the next one proves me wrong. Something in my chest tightened. I recognized that feeling too well, the sense of standing in the middle of a storm with no clear edge in sight. I wanted to tell her it would get better. I wanted to promise her things would work out. But I didn't know that. So I didn't lie. That sounds unbearable, I said instead. She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if surprised someone had named it so plainly. Her shoulders sagged a little, like she'd been holding them up all night. They spoke about smaller things after that, details that felt safer once the hardest truths were out. She apologized again for crying. I told her she didn't need to. At some point, I realized how late it had gotten. The darkness outside the window was starting to thin, the sky turning that soft gray that comes before morning. I should probably let you sleep, she said, glancing toward the clock on the wall. I stood, suddenly reluctant to go. If you need anything, I said, then stopped, unsure how to finish. The phrase felt empty on its own. She stood too. Thank you, she said quietly. For knocking. Most people wouldn't have. I nodded, feeling oddly shy. At the door, I hesitated, then turned back. I'm glad I did. She smiled, not wide, not happy, but real. I stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. As I walked back to my apartment, the building felt different, like something unseen had shifted between the walls. I lay down without undressing, the sound of her crying still echoing in my mind, not as a burden this time, but as a reminder that sometimes the smallest decisions, made in the quietest hours, can change the shape of a night. The next morning, I found a note under my door. Just 2 words, thank you. I smiled, then went to work, thinking the night would fade into memory like most things do. But it didn't. Over the next days, we started talking, first about small things, then about the heavier ones. Coffee turned into walks. Walks turned into shared dinners when one of us had cooked too much. Weeks later, she told me that night had been the first time she hadn't felt alone in years. I realized it was the same for me. Nothing dramatic had happened, no grand declarations, no sudden miracles. Just 2 lives brushing together at a fragile moment and choosing not to pull away. Some nights change everything not because of what you do, but because you show up when someone needs to be heard. And once you've done that, the world never looks quite the same again.